After Jesus' baptism, Matthew tells us that he was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Now, that is a pattern that the Christian life often seems to follow. After a monumental experience that we have had, such as the one that Jesus has had in his baptism, where the heavens were opened and the voice of God said, "This is my son in whom I'm well pleased." And after having such a tremendous experience, next thing you know, he finds himself in the wilderness. And often when we have great experiences of faith, next thing we know, we are in the wilderness and we wonder, where have we taken the wrong turn? Now, in Jesus' case, and often in our case, it doesn't mean that we have taken the wrong turn. It simply means that this is where God is leading us next, for the very purpose, as he informs us here in Scripture, to be tempted. Now, how does that work? Jesus was fasting for 40 days, which is and 40 nights, which is quite a long time, and he was very hungry. And then the tempter came to him, and the first thing he said is, "Since you're hungry, why don't you turn these stones into bread and eat from them?" And then Jesus quotes scripture at him. That's in Deuteronomy 8, in case anyone's interested. And he says, "Man shall not live of bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." The devil then comes back at him, seeing that Jesus quotes scripture. He himself now quotes scripture, and that is Psalm 91, where he says, "Well, if you are the Son of God, then throw yourself down from the temple." And because in Psalm 91 is written that if you are the Messiah, then the angels will be commanded to lift you up in their hands. And so even if you throw yourself down, nothing will happen to you. And then Jesus comes back to him and says, "But it is also written, you should not put the Lord your God to the test." That is Deuteronomy 6. Now, that is a strange answer, but we'll explore in more detail what that means. And the last attempt that the devil then makes is that he takes him to a very high mountain and shows him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. Now, that seems to me to indicate that all of that is happening in a vision that Jesus has during his fast, because at the very least I'm not aware that there is such a mountain from which you can see all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. But anyway, that doesn't mean it's not true. It simply means that it seems more plausible that it happened in a vision. Then the last thing the devil attempts is that he says, "Look at these amazing kingdoms. I will give all of them to you if you bow down and worship me." And then Jesus says to him, "Go away, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him alone," or him only. And then the devil left him, and angels came to attend to him. Now, that is actually quite a dense kind of telling the story, and it's quite masterly how Matthew has interwoven so many different Old Testament passages with so much to say in such a short passage. And we'll need a few videos to explore that in more detail. But let's just ask the basic questions first. Now, what's up with those temptations here? Because let's face it, the things in which Jesus was tempted, maybe the first one, he was actually hungry. Maybe that was an actual temptation to eat bread now. But these other two, to throw yourself down from the temple or to worship the devil, those don't seem to be the strongest temptations. But there is another way to explain that, and that is to explain them as a test. Now, a temptation would mean that the devil is trying to get Jesus to sin, but a test would mean that the devil is trying to test what kind of Messiah Jesus is. Because remember, in his baptism, it was revealed that Jesus is the Messiah, and it launches him into his ministry. And then the next thing, the testing, would then indicate that it is being tested what kind of Messiah Jesus is going to be. And it seems to me that this is the better explanation, because the temptation to sin is not a theme that comes out very clearly here. But again, we'll explore that in more detail. Let's now just briefly look at the main thrust of this short message. And I think the main thrust here is that it presents Jesus as the new and true Israel. Now, what do I mean by that? Those three temptations, observe those three temptations here, they correspond to the Old Testament. Now, the first temptation was the bread. The second temptation is the tempting or the testing of God. Testing of God. And then the third temptation is the worship of the devil. Now, those three temptations correspond exactly to the three temptations that the Israelites were faced in the wilderness. The first temptation is the temptation of the manna. After eating manna for so many years, the Israelites got sick of it, and they rebelled against God. And there's a story in Numbers 11 of how God reacts very violently against the way the Israelites reject the manna. So, and that's actually where this quote in Deuteronomy 8 refers to. This explanation here, that man shall not live of bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God, is told in reference to this manna story. Then the testing of God is the story of the rock. If you remember, the Israelites were thirsty, and then they said, if God is among us, we shouldn't be thirsty, and our leader should be able to just strike a rock and then the water would come out. Now, it doesn't seem that the Israelites were thirsty, but they didn't seem to be in a dangerous condition. They simply felt they were in the mood to just see how powerful God and how powerful Moses is. And so they challenge him, and they challenge Moses and say, if it's true that the living God is among us, then we shouldn't be in the wilderness here being thirsty. You should be able to just strike a rock and then water would come out. And unfortunately, Moses colludes with them, and he actually does that. He strikes the rock, and God brings out the water and later tells him, I only did that not to embarrass you. But because Moses colluded with the Israelites, testing God and seeing if what he says is really true and if he's really among them, that's why Moses himself was not allowed to go into the promised land. We read the story in Exodus 37. And Exodus 17. And then the worship of the devil is, of course, the worship of the golden calf, which we also read in Exodus 32-ish. I'll have to look up the exact passage. So you see those three temptations immediately correspond to the temptation of the Israelites. And remember, the Israelites, they failed those temptations. So they failed, and as a result, they were not, even including Moses here, they were not allowed into the promised land. Now, Jesus, on the other hand, he overcame. He was tested in those three areas, and he overcame the devil in all three of them. And the great conclusion of all of that, the meaning of the story, is then, of course, that Jesus is the one, the new and improved, the new and true Israel. He is the one who embodies his people, who wraps his arms around his people. He is the one who represents his people. He is the one who stands on behalf of his people. That is the great meaning of this. So remember, the whole idea was that through Israel, God would reestablish the rule of heaven on earth, and Israel has never been able to live up to that. They've had a kingdom, but it's never been great and successful enough, and with all their struggles of worshipping other idols, they have proven themselves to be more part of the problem than the solution. And now Jesus is coming, and he's saying, I am the real Israel. I am the one who is tested in the same areas as the Israelites were, and I am not failing. I am standing on behalf of my people.